The pungent scent of summer dust filled Willow Dawson's lungs as she ducked into the mercantile, clutching her bonnet tighter against her face. Nevada City, Montana Territory, 1876, a place that promised new beginnings but couldn't erase the past etched permanently into her skin. Miss Dawson. Your order came in yesterday. Mr. Thompson's cheerful voice carried across the store. He was one of the few townspeople who didn't stare at her, or worse, deliberately look away. Thank you, Mr. Thompson. Willow kept her head down, angling the right side of her face away as she approached the counter. It had become second nature after 3 months in Nevada City, this dance of concealment. Gardens coming along nicely at the old Pearson place, he commented, gathering her supplies. Folks say you've got a way with those vegetables that hasn't been seen since old Mrs. Pearson herself. Willow allowed herself a small smile. The soil's good there, just needs some attention. She carefully counted out coins from her dwindling savings. The small inheritance from her aunt had secured the modest homestead on the outskirts of town, but it wouldn't last forever. The garden was more necessity than hobby. As Mr. Thompson wrapped her items, the bell above the door jangled. Heavy boots thudded across the wooden floor, followed by the distinct jingling of spurs. Willow instinctively turned her scarred side away. Samuel, didn't expect to see you back so soon. Mr. Thompson's face brightened. Got the cattle to Helena ahead of schedule. The man's voice was deep, with a hint of Texas that hadn't been weathered away by Montana winters. Willow kept her eyes down, gathering her parcels quickly. Samuel Wyatt was well known in Nevada City ranch foreman at the Broken Arrow, respected horseman, and according to the town's gossips, the most eligible bachelor in the territory. She'd managed to avoid direct encounters with him since her arrival, preferring the solitude of her small homestead to town gatherings where her scars drew unwanted attention. Miss Dawson, have you met Samuel Wyatt? Mr. Thompson asked, oblivious to her discomfort. Not formally, she murmured, keeping her face angled away. Miss Dawson bought the Pearson place, Thompson explained to the rancher. Makes the finest preserves you've ever tasted. Brought some in last week that sold before sundown. Is that so? Samuel's voice carried genuine interest. She risked a quick glance. Tall and broad-shouldered, with sun-bronzed skin and eyes the color of Montana sky. A small scar bisected his left eyebrow, and several days' worth of stubble darkened his jaw. He wasn't handsome in the refined way of Eastern men, but rather carried the rugged appeal of someone shaped by frontier life. Pleasure to meet you, Miss Dawson. He tipped his hat, revealing dark hair in need of a trim. Likewise, Mr. Wyatt. She nodded curtly, turning to leave. Wait, he called. If you're heading back to the Pearson place, there's a storm brewing. Would you allow me to drive you? My wagon's outside. That's very kind, but unnecessary. I've weathered storms before. She adjusted her bonnet to better shield her face. Samuel frowned, glancing toward the darkening sky visible through the windows. No doubt you have, madam, but that looks to be a real gully washer. Your preserves might survive, but those paper parcels surely won't. Mr. Thompson peered outside. He's right, Miss Dawson. That's turning mean quick. Willow hesitated, trapped between practicality and pride. Her supplies wouldn't survive a drenching, and the thought of replacing them made her purse feel even lighter. Very well, she conceded reluctantly. 10 minutes later, she sat stiffly beside Samuel Wyatt on his wagon bench as they left town, the first fat raindrops already beginning to fall. She kept her face turned away, using the excuse of watching the approaching storm. You're not much for conversation, are you, Miss Dawson? His tone held amusement rather than offense. I find silence preferable to idle chatter. Samuel laughed. a warm, genuine sound that surprised her. Fair enough. Though in my experience, silence gives a person too much time with their own thoughts, and mine aren't always the best company. Thunder rolled across the plains as rain began falling in earnest. Samuel urged the horses to a faster pace. "How long have you been in Nevada City?" he asked, seemingly undeterred by her reticence. 3 months. From back east, I'm guessing. Your accent gives you away. Willow stiffened. Pennsylvania, Philadelphia, long way from home. This is my home now. Her tone ended further questions on that topic. They crested a small rise, and her cottage came into view, a modest 2-room structure with a newly mended roof, and the flourishing garden that had become her sanctuary. Samuel pulled the wagon under the shelter of a large cottonwood near her porch just as the skies truly opened. Rain drummed against the wagon canvas as they sat, momentarily trapped. "Quite a garden you've started," he observed, nodding toward the neat rows of vegetables. "Most newcomers take a season or two before they understand this soil." "I've always gardened," Willow replied. "Plants don't care about appearances. They respond to care and patience, nothing more." A flash of lightning illuminated the wagon interior, and for a moment she forgot to turn away. Samuel's eyes met hers directly, then inevitably drifted to the right side of her face, where the scars twisted from her temple down to her jaw, angry, ridged reminders of the fire that had taken her parents and her former life. She quickly turned away, shame burning hotter than the lightning outside. "Thank you for the ride, Mr. Wyatt. I can manage from here." But before she could move, his voice came quietly through the downpour. "My mother had scars too. Different cause, same result." People staring, or worse, pretending not to notice while seeing nothing else. Willow remained frozen, her hand on the wagon's side. "She was the strongest person I ever knew," he continued. "Said scars were just stories written on skin." "Some stories are better left untold," Willow replied, her voice barely audible above the rain. "Maybe. But hiding them doesn't erase them." He reached for her packages. "Let me help you inside with these." Before she could protest, he had gathered her supplies and was splashing through puddles to her porch. With a deep breath, Willow pulled her bonnet lower and followed. The interior of the cottage was small but meticulously organized. Dried herbs hung from the ceiling beams, and preserving jars lined the shelves Samuel had glimpsed through the window. A small cookstove provided the main source of heat, and beside it, a rocking chair with a half-finished piece of embroidery. "You've made this place your own," he observed, setting her packages on the table. "It serves my needs." She remained by the door, clearly waiting for his departure. Samuel studied her for a moment. Most people in Nevada City knew little about the mysterious woman who kept to herself at the old Pearson place. The gossips speculated, of course, a jilted bride, a woman fleeing scandal, even a criminal on the run. Samuel found himself genuinely curious about the truth behind those scars and the wariness in her eyes. "Storms set in for the afternoon," he noted, looking out the window at the sheets of rain. "Your roof appears sound, though. I had it repaired last month." She didn't elaborate on the effort it had taken a woman alone, negotiating with reluctant workmen who doubled their price when they saw her desperation. "Good thinking." Samuel removed his hat, running a hand through his rain-dampened hair. "Mind if I wait it out a bit?" Not eager to get soaked through. Willow hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with the request. Privacy was her refuge. "I can make coffee," she finally offered, the barest minimum of hospitality. "That would be welcome." As Willow busied herself with the coffee pot, Samuel took the opportunity to observe her more carefully. Despite her efforts to hide them, the scars were extensive burn scars, he guessed, covering the right side of her face from temple to jaw. Yet they didn't diminish the fine features on the unmarked side. High cheekbones, a determined chin, and expressive green eyes currently focused intently on her task. "I hear from Thompson you make preserves," he said, breaking the uncomfortable silence. "Yes, jams and pickled vegetables mostly." She kept her back to him. "The garden provides enough extra to sell, resourceful." She glanced over her shoulder, a hint of defiance in her expression. "Necessary. A woman alone has limited options." "True enough," Samuel acknowledged. "This territory isn't kind to anyone lacking resources or connections." The coffee began to boil, and Willow poured 2 cups, finally turning to face him. She placed his cup on the table and retreated to the rocking chair, maintaining distance between them. "Have you always been a rancher, Mr. Wyatt?" she asked, surprising him with the personal question. "Samuel, please." He sipped the strong coffee appreciatively. "And no. Tried mining first, like most fools who came west. Nearly starved before I admitted I knew more about cattle than gold. Been working at the Broken Arrow for 8 years now. As foreman, worked up to it. Started as a hand, learned the country, saved enough to buy a small stake in the operation 3 years back." Willow nodded, absently touching the scars along her jaw, a habit she seemed unaware of. "Is it a large ranch?" 5,000 acres, give or take. 200 head of cattle, 40 horses. Small compared to some, but Edgar Preston runs it well. Treats his men fair. Outside, the rain continued unabated, drumming on the roof and streaming down the windows. The storm had darkened the afternoon to an early twilight, giving the cottage a strangely intimate atmosphere despite the tension between them. "And you, Miss Dawson, what brought you all the way from Philadelphia to our little corner of Montana?" Samuel ventured. She stiffened, eyes dropping to her coffee cup. "A desire for solitude. Seems you've found it." He gestured toward the window and the isolated homestead beyond. "Though solitude has its limits as comfort. It offers fewer disappointments than people," she countered. Samuel studied her, recognizing the defensive barrier she maintained. "Most folks here are decent enough, once they know you." "I have no interest in being known, Mr. Wyatt." Her voice was firm. "I came here to be left alone, not to become a curiosity or an object of pity." "Is that what you think you'd be?" "It's what I've always been since this." She gestured vaguely toward her scarred face. "First horror, then pity, finally invisibility. I prefer to skip the progression and choose my own isolation." The frankness of her answer surprised him. "Sounds lonely." "Loneliness is preferable to cruelty." The rain began to slacken and Willow rose, a clear dismissal. "The worst has passed. You should be able to return to town now." Samuel finished his coffee and stood, reaching for his hat. "Thank you for the shelter and coffee, Miss Dawson." At the door he paused. "The Broken Arrow's having a harvest dance next Saturday. Nothing fancy, just good food, some music. You'd be welcome." She gave him a look of such disbelief that he almost smiled. "I don't dance, Mr. Wyatt, nor do I with any skill. But the company's good, and Preston's wife makes a peach cobbler worth the trip alone. Thank you for the invitation, but no." She opened the door, raindrops still dripping from the eaves. Samuel stepped onto the porch, then turned back. "Those preserves Thompson mentioned, if you've more to sell, the ranch could use them. We've got 20 hungry men and our cook does his best, but variety's lacking." A flicker of interest crossed her face. "Business, not socializing." "What kind would you need?" "Whatever you make." "I'll pay fair market plus 10% for delivery to the ranch. I can have a dozen jars ready by next week." Samuel nodded, settling his hat against the lingering drizzle. "I'll stop by Tuesday if that suits." For the briefest moment, uncertainty replaced the guardedness in her eyes. Then she nodded. "Tuesday." He tipped his hat and splashed back to his wagon, aware of her watching from the doorway until he turned toward the main road. As Samuel drove back toward town, his thoughts remained on Willow Dawson's scars, not the visible ones that mapped her face, but the deeper ones evident in her careful isolation and defensive barriers. In his years on the frontier, he'd encountered many wounded souls seeking new beginnings in the West's vast spaces. Some found healing in the mountains and prairies. Others merely found new places to nurse old hurts. He wondered which Willow would prove to be. Tuesday arrived with clear skies and a crisp autumn breeze that rustled through Willow's garden. She'd spent the previous days harvesting the last summer vegetables and preparing preserves more than the dozen jars she'd promised Samuel Wyatt. Business was business, and his offer of premium pricing was too practical to refuse. Still, she found herself unusually attentive to her appearance as the appointed hour approached. She'd washed her hair and arranged it to partially shield the right side of her face, a compromise between practicality and her habitual concealment. "Foolishness," she muttered to herself, adjusting jars on her table for the third time. Samuel Wyatt's interest was purely commercial, and she had no reason to consider it otherwise. Men like him, confident, respected, unmarked by tragedy, didn't look twice at women with faces like hers, except in pity or morbid curiosity. The sound of approaching hoofbeats pulled her from these thoughts. She quickly checked her reflection in the small mirror beside the door, then scolded herself for the gesture. Samuel rode up on a chestnut gelding rather than bringing the wagon, which momentarily confused her until she saw the pack horse trailing behind. He dismounted with the fluid ease of a man who'd spent most of his life in the saddle. "Miss Dawson," he called, removing his hat as he approached the porch where she waited. "Beautiful day." "It is," she agreed, noticing how the sunlight brought out auburn highlights in his dark hair. "The preserves are ready, efficient as promised." He smiled, following her inside where the jars were displayed on her table. "More than a dozen, I see. I had extra produce that needed preserving. You're welcome to take what you can transport." Samuel examined the jars: strawberry and apple preserves, pickled beans and beets, and several jars of what appeared to be tomato relish. "These look fine indeed. The cook will be delighted." They negotiated a fair price for the entire batch, and Willow found herself surprisingly comfortable with the transaction. Samuel treated her normally, no awkward avoidance of looking at her scars, no excessive politeness masking discomfort. It was refreshing. "I brought something else," he said after they'd loaded the preserves into his saddlebags and panniers. He reached into his coat and produced a worn book. "Thought you might enjoy this. Not much for reading myself, but this was my mother's favorite." Willow accepted the volume cautiously. "Pride and Prejudice," she read, running her fingers over the embossed cover. She said it reminded her that first impressions aren't always lasting ones. His eyes held hers steadily. "Thought maybe you'd appreciate the sentiment." The gesture caught her entirely off guard. Thank you. I'll take good care of it. Keep it as long as you like. It's just gathering dust otherwise." He settled his hat back on his head. "That offer for the harvest dance still stands. Saturday evening." Willow shook her head. "I appreciate the thought, Mr. Wyatt, but Samuel," he corrected. "And before you refuse again, consider it a business opportunity. Lot of potential customers for those preserves will be there. Preston's invited half the county." She hesitated, torn between her instinct for isolation and the practical appeal of expanding her small business. "Just think on it," he said, mounting his horse. "No dancing required." After Samuel departed, Willow sat on her porch with Jane Austen's novel in her lap, conflicted emotions churning inside her. The harvest dance represented everything she'd avoided since arriving in Nevada City crowds: attention, the inevitable stares and whispers. Yet Samuel's matter-of-fact manner made the idea less daunting than it might have been. By Saturday morning, she still hadn't decided. She spent the day in her garden, harvesting the last tomatoes before the inevitable frost, trying to convince herself that staying home was the sensible choice. But as afternoon shadows lengthened across her small patch of land, she found herself drawing a bath and washing her hair, decisions apparently made by some part of her that refused to listen to caution. The blue dress was the nicest she owned, modest but well-made, purchased in the days before the fire when she'd been Joseph Fleming's fiancée, with a future of social gatherings ahead. She'd never worn it after her injuries, had nearly left it behind in Philadelphia. Now she smoothed the fabric over her hips, surprised it still fit after all that had changed. Her reflection in the mirror showed a stranger half familiar, half transformed. She arranged her hair to partially cover the right side of her face, knowing it was an imperfect concealment but the best she could manage. For a moment, she almost changed her mind, almost returned the dress to its trunk. The knock at her door startled her from this wavering. Samuel stood on her porch, hat in hand, dressed in clean clothes with his hair neatly trimmed. He looked momentarily stunned when she opened the door. "Miss Dawson," he managed after a pause. "I wasn't sure if. That is, I hoped you might want to ride to the dance if you decided to come." "I'm still deciding," she admitted. His eyes took in her appearance, lingering briefly but not unkindly on the visible scars. "That shade of blue suits you." The simple compliment, delivered without artifice, tipped her wavering resolve. "I suppose I could attend, briefly." The Broken Arrow Ranch sprawled across a picturesque valley, 15 miles north of Nevada City. The main house was larger than Willow had expected, 2 stories of sturdy timber construction, with a wide veranda and several outbuildings. Lanterns illuminated the yard where tables had been arranged, and a makeshift dance floor constructed near the barn where musicians were already playing. Samuel helped her down from the wagon, her hand trembling slightly in his steady grasp. "Preston and his wife are good people," he reassured her, sensing her nervousness. "No need to worry." Willow nodded, keeping close to his side as they approached the gathering. At least 50 people had already arrived, with more coming down the road behind them. More people than she'd faced at once since leaving Philadelphia. "Samuel, about time you showed up." A robust man with a silver-streaked beard approached, clapping Samuel on the shoulder. His gaze shifted curiously to Willow. "And you've brought a guest." "Edgar Preston. May I introduce Miss Willow Dawson? She's the one making those preserves I mentioned." "Pleasure to meet you, Miss Dawson." Preston's eyes registered the scars, but his smile remained genuine. "My wife's been singing the praises of your strawberry jam since Samuel brought it home." "Thank you for having me, Mr. Preston," Willow managed, fighting the urge to turn her scarred side away. "Any friend of Samuel's is welcome here. Come, let me introduce you to Margaret." As they moved through the crowd, Willow felt the familiar weight of stares, heard the momentary lulls in conversation as people noticed her face. She kept her eyes forward, reminding herself this was merely business, a chance to establish connections for her preserves. Nothing more. Margaret Preston proved to be a gracious hostess, genuinely interested in Willow's gardening and preserving techniques. Their conversation gradually drew in other women, and Willow found herself explaining her methods for maintaining garden soil through Montana's harsh winters. Samuel stayed nearby, occasionally joining the conversation but mainly watching with apparent satisfaction as Willow cautiously engaged with the community she'd avoided for months. "You see," he murmured when they briefly found themselves alone as dinner was being served, Not so terrible. Everyone's being very polite, she conceded. It's not politeness. It's genuine interest. You know, things they want to learn. The dinner was abundant roast beef, potatoes, fresh bread, and vegetables from local gardens. Willow found herself seated between Samuel and a friendly woman named Clara Jenkins, who peppered her with questions about pickling techniques. As the meal progressed, Willow gradually relaxed. The initial stares had subsided, and while she occasionally caught people glancing at her scars, the reaction seemed more curious than repulsed. In Philadelphia, she'd encountered far worse open revulsion, cruel comments barely concealed behind fans, and the devastating withdrawal of her fiancé, who couldn't bear the thought of a disfigured bride. After dinner, the music resumed more vigorously. Couples moved to the dance floor, and children darted between tables, playing elaborate games in the lantern light. "Care to walk a bit?" Samuel asked as the dancing began. "The view from the north pasture is worth seeing at sunset." Grateful to escape the increasing noise and activity, Willow nodded. They slipped away from the gathering, following a well-worn path that led to a gentle rise overlooking the ranch. The setting sun painted the mountains in shades of purple and gold, while the valley below glowed in the warm evening light. "It's beautiful," Willow admitted, momentarily forgetting her self-consciousness as she absorbed the magnificent landscape. "Most beautiful country I've ever seen," Samuel agreed. "Changes every day, every season, but always takes my breath away." They stood in comfortable silence, watching the sun's final descent behind the western peaks. In the growing dusk, with the ranch lights twinkling below and stars beginning to appear overhead, Willow felt a peace she hadn't experienced since before the fire. "Thank you," she said softly, "for persuading me to come. Thank you for trusting me enough to try." Samuel turned to face her, his expression serious in the fading light. Courage doesn't always look like facing down outlaws or surviving blizzards. Sometimes it's just showing up when every instinct says to hide. The understanding in his voice touched something deep within her, a recognition that he somehow saw beyond her scars to the person fighting to emerge from behind them. "The fire happened last year," she found herself saying, the words coming unbidden after months of silence. "My parents' house. I managed to get them out but went back for the family Bible. The second floor collapsed." Her fingers unconsciously traced the ridged skin along her jaw. "They didn't survive their injuries. I did, but changed." Samuel listened without interrupting, his eyes steady on hers. "My fiancé couldn't bear to look at me afterward, called off our engagement, said he was doing me a kindness, that I wouldn't want to live as an object of pity." Bitterness tinged her voice, as if he knew what I wanted better than I did. "Some men are fools," Samuel said simply. "Everyone I knew treated me differently. Friends avoided me, strangers stared. I became my scars, nothing more." She took a deep breath. "So I left, came west where nobody knew me or what I looked like before, to start fresh. To disappear," she corrected. "But it seems even here I'm still defined by this." She gestured toward her face. Samuel shook his head. "Only if you allow it." From below, music drifted up the hillside, a slow, melodious tune that seemed to complement the emerging stars. Without warning, Samuel held out his hand. "Dance with me," he said. Willow stared at his outstretched hand. "Here, best dance floor in Montana," he smiled. "And no audience but the stars." Perhaps it was the peaceful evening or the relief of finally speaking about her past, but Willow found herself placing her hand in his. Samuel drew her gently into a simple dance, one hand respectfully at her waist, the other holding hers. They moved together on the hilltop, awkwardly at first, then with growing confidence as Willow remembered steps she thought she'd never use again. Samuel wasn't a skilled dancer, but his natural grace made up for technical deficiencies. "See, not so terrible," he murmured, unconsciously echoing his earlier words. "You're being kind," she replied. "I'm being honest. There's a difference." The music from below changed to a livelier tune, but they continued their slower dance, reluctant to break the moment. In the darkness, with only starlight illuminating them, Willow felt the hard shell she'd built around herself beginning to crack. "We should return," she said finally, practical concerns reasserting themselves. "People will wonder where you've disappeared to. Let them wonder." But he slowed their movement, though he didn't release her hand. "Willow," the use of her first name startled her. "I'd like to call on you." Properly, not just for business. She withdrew her hand, instinctive defenses rising. "Why?" The bluntness of her question didn't seem to offend him. "Because I enjoy your company. Because you're interesting and determined and stronger than you give yourself credit for. And my face." She challenged. In the darkness, she sensed rather than saw his smile. "Your face tells me you're a survivor, that you've endured fire and came through it. What's not to admire about that?" His sincerity disarmed her prepared rejection. In Philadelphia, there had been men who'd approached her after the accident, some from morbid curiosity, others believing her reduced circumstances and ruined prospects would make her grateful for any attention. Samuel's straightforward interest felt different. "I don't want pity," she said firmly. "Good. I'm not offering any." He gestured toward the lights below. "Shall we head back? I promised Preston I'd help with the cleanup, and I believe you have potential customers waiting to discuss your preserves." The remainder of the evening passed in a blur of conversations and business arrangements. Margaret Preston commissioned 24 jars for the coming winter. 3 other ranching families placed similar orders. By the time they departed, Willow had sold her entire existing inventory and taken orders that would keep her busy through the autumn harvest. On the drive back to her homestead, exhaustion and exhilaration warred within her. She'd faced her fear of public scrutiny and found it less overwhelming than anticipated. People had noticed her scars, certainly, but had seemed more interested in her preserves and gardening knowledge. "You've made quite an impression," Samuel remarked as they approached her cottage. "Preston's already talking about having you give a demonstration on preserving techniques before winter sets in." "That's flattering. It's practical. Most folks here know ranching and mining, not gardening. Your knowledge is valuable." Samuel helped her down from the wagon and walked her to the door, maintaining a respectful distance that nonetheless felt companionable. "Thank you," she said, pausing on the porch, "for encouraging me to attend. It was unexpectedly pleasant. Does that mean I can call on you? Sunday, perhaps?" The earnestness in his expression gave her pause. It had been so long since anyone had looked at her with genuine interest rather than pity or revulsion. "I should be here," she answered, neither accepting nor rejecting his interest. "Good night, Samuel." "Good night, Willow." As autumn progressed into early winter, Samuel became a regular visitor at Willow's cottage. Sometimes he brought supplies from town or books borrowed from the Prestons' extensive library. Other times he simply appeared with his tools, repairing her sagging porch steps or reinforcing the chicken coop against predators. Willow found herself gradually lowering the defenses she'd maintained since the fire. Samuel's steady presence and matter-of-fact acceptance made it easier to believe that perhaps there could be a place for her in Nevada City beyond isolated self-sufficiency. In late November, the first significant snowfall transformed the landscape. Willow woke to a world blanketed in white. The familiar contours of her garden and yard softened into gentle mounds and drifts. The beauty of it momentarily took her breath away, her first Montana winter. A knock on her door mid-morning surprised her. Few people ventured out after heavy snow unless necessary. Samuel stood on her porch, snow dusting his hat and shoulders, leading a horse with panniers. "Thought you might need provisions," he explained. "Town's likely to be inaccessible for a few days." The thoughtfulness of the gesture touched her deeply. "Come in and warm yourself," she invited, suddenly conscious of her simple dress and hair loosely braided down her back. Samuel stomped snow from his boots and entered, bringing with him the sharp, clean scent of winter air. He placed a sack of supplies on her table: coffee, sugar, flour, and even a small package of peppermint candies. "The candies from Margaret Preston," he explained. "She insists they're essential for winter evenings. She's very kind." Willow busied herself preparing coffee, aware of Samuel watching her with those steady blue eyes that never seemed to shy away from her scars. Over the past weeks, something had shifted between them, a tentative trust building through shared conversations and quiet companionship. Samuel had told her about his childhood in Texas, his mother's death from fever when he was 15, his journey west with his father, who'd later died in a mining accident. Willow had gradually revealed more about her life in Philadelphia: her parents, her broken engagement, her decision to start anew in Montana. "The snow will get worse before it improves," Samuel noted, accepting the steaming cup she offered. "Preston's predicting a harsh winter." "I've prepared as best I can." Willow gestured toward her stocked pantry and the woodpile visible through the window. "The garden's been put to bed, and the hens are secure." "You're more capable than most who come west," he observed. "Still, it's no small thing to face a Montana winter alone." The concern in his voice warmed her more than the coffee. "I've grown accustomed to being alone." By necessity or choice, the question hung between them, more significant than its simple words suggested. "Both, I suppose." She met his gaze directly. "At first necessity, after this." She touched her scars briefly, then choice, because it seemed safer. "And now?" His voice was quiet. Willow considered the question honestly. "Now I'm less certain isolation is the answer." Something shifted in Samuel's expression: hope, perhaps, or determination. He set down his coffee cup and moved toward her with deliberate steps that gave her ample time to retreat. When she remained still, he slowly raised his hand and, with infinite gentleness, traced his fingers along the scarred side of her face. "You're perfect," he said softly, his touch following the ridged path from temple to jaw without hesitation or revulsion. Tears sprang to Willow's eyes, not from shame or embarrassment, but from the overwhelming relief of being touched with tenderness rather than clinical detachment or reluctant obligation. "How can you say that?" she whispered, fighting the urge to turn away. "Look at me." "I am looking," Samuel replied, his gaze unwavering. "I see a woman who walked through fire and survived, who built a new life with nothing but determination and courage, whose strength puts most men I know to shame." His hand cradled her cheek, thumb gently stroking the uneven texture of her scars. "These are part of your story, Willow, not flaws to be hidden." The tenderness in his touch broke something inside her, the carefully maintained wall between herself and the world. A sob escaped her throat as years of shame and isolation culminated in this moment of acceptance. Samuel drew her into his arms, holding her as the emotional storm broke. She cried against his chest, releasing grief not just for her changed appearance, but for all she'd lost: her parents, her former life, the simple luxury of walking through the world without being defined by tragedy. When her tears finally subsided, she became acutely aware of his steady heartbeat beneath her cheek, his hands rubbing soothing circles on her back. Embarrassment flooded her, and she started to pull away. "I'm sorry, I don't apologize," he interrupted gently. Not for feeling. She met his eyes, searching for pity or discomfort but finding only warmth and something deeper that made her breath catch. "Willow," he said, her name a caress on his lips. "May I kiss you?" The question, asked with such simple directness, momentarily stunned her. No one had kissed her since before the fire, since Joseph had recoiled from her changed face with poorly disguised revulsion. "Yes," she whispered, surprised by her own answer. Samuel's lips met hers with exquisite gentleness, a question rather than a demand. When she responded, his arms tightened around her, drawing her closer as the kiss deepened into something that awakened long-dormant feelings within her. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, Samuel rested his forehead against hers. "I've wanted to do that since the harvest dance," he admitted. "Why didn't you? Wasn't sure you'd welcome it. Wasn't sure you'd believe my interest was genuine." She studied his face, the sincerity in his eyes. "I'm still not entirely certain why you'd choose me when you could have any unmarked woman in the territory." Samuel shook his head, a hint of frustration crossing his features. "You still don't understand. I'm not interested despite your scars, Willow. Who you are includes them, your courage, your resilience, your determination to forge ahead when most would have surrendered. That's what draws me to you." The snow continued falling outside, cocooning them in a world temporarily reduced to the warmth of her small cottage. In that intimate space, Willow allowed herself to believe that perhaps Samuel was telling the truth, that he saw in her something worthy beyond the ruined face that had defined her existence for so long. "Stay for dinner," she offered impulsively. "The snow's getting worse." Relief and pleasure brightened his expression. "I'd like that." As they worked together preparing a simple meal, moving around her small kitchen in companionable harmony, Willow felt a barrier within her continue to dissolve. For the first time since the fire, she didn't constantly think about positioning herself to hide her scars or monitor Samuel's expression for signs of discomfort. After dinner, they sat before the fire, talking about inconsequential things as the storm intensified outside. When the window panes began to rattle with the force of the wind, Samuel reluctantly rose. "I should get back to the ranch before this worsens. Preston will be concerned." Willow nodded, though part of her wished he could remain in this bubble of warmth and acceptance they'd created. "Be careful." The road disappears quickly in drifting snow. At the door, he paused, cupping her face between his hands. This time, he deliberately placed a kiss on her scarred cheek before finding her lips again in a more lingering farewell. "I'll return when the weather allows," he promised. "I'll be here." After he left, Willow stood at the window watching until his figure disappeared into the swirling snow. She raised her hand to her cheek where his lips had touched her scars, marveling at how something so simple could feel so profoundly healing. The blizzard lasted 3 days, confining everyone to their homes and ranches. When it finally abated, the world emerged transformed, pristine white expanses, broken only by the stark shadows of trees and fence lines. The temperature dropped further, turning the snow to a crystalline crust that crunched underfoot. Willow had just finished feeding her chickens when she heard the now familiar sound of Samuel's approach. He appeared on horseback, muffled in a heavy coat and scarf, his breath visible in the frigid air. "Checking on my favorite neighbor," he called, dismounting stiffly. "Preston insisted I make rounds of the outlying homesteads. And am I your first stop or last?" She teased, surprising herself with the lightness in her tone. "First," he admitted with a grin. "Wanted to be sure you'd weathered the storm." "Quite comfortably," she assured him, leading the way inside where the stove kept her cottage tolerably warm. As Samuel removed his outer layers, stomping snow from his boots, Willow noticed he carried a package wrapped in oilcloth. "What's this?" she asked as he placed it on her table. "Something I've been working on." He unwrapped it carefully, revealing a wooden box with intricate carving across the lid, a pattern of wildflowers and vines that matched those in her summer garden. "Samuel, it's beautiful." She traced the detailed work with her fingertips. "Open it," he encouraged. Inside, compartments were fitted with small glass jars perfect for her preserves and dried herbs. The craftsmanship was exquisite, every joint precisely fitted, the interior sanded smooth as silk. "You made this?" she asked, amazed. "During evenings at the bunkhouse." "The men think I've gone soft in the head, spending winter nights whittling instead of playing cards." His smile was both shy and proud. "Do you like it? It's the most thoughtful gift I've ever received." Emotion thickened her voice. "Thank you." Their eyes met across the table, and the atmosphere in the cottage shifted subtly. 3 days of separation after their first kiss had only intensified the connection between them. Samuel moved around the table, slow and deliberate as always, giving her time to retreat if she wished. When she remained in place, he drew her into his arms, his kiss no longer tentative but certain, a man who knew his attentions were welcome. Willow responded with equal certainty, her hands sliding up to his shoulders, then into his hair as the kiss deepened. Something unfurled within her, a flowering of long-suppressed desires and hopes. When they finally parted, both breathing unevenly, Samuel rested his forehead against hers. "I've missed you," he admitted. 3 days felt like a month." "I've missed you too." The admission came easily, surprising her with its truth. Somehow, in the span of a few months, this man had become essential to her life's rhythm. As winter settled fully across Montana, Samuel's visits became the highlight of Willow's days. Sometimes he brought news from town or supplies she couldn't fetch herself through the deep snow. Other times he simply appeared to share a meal or read with her by the fire. The townspeople noticed, of course. Gossip traveled faster than horseback in Nevada City. When Willow ventured into town after the roads cleared, she found the reception subtly changed, less avoidance, more genuine greetings. Samuel Wyatt's open courtship had granted her a different status. "Mrs. Thompson wants more of your rosehip jelly," Samuel reported one evening in January, lounging in her rocking chair while she mended a tear in one of his shirts. The domesticity of the scene wasn't lost on either of them. "Says it's the only thing helping her arthritis this winter." "I'll prepare some tomorrow," Willow promised, tying off her thread, "though I'm running low on supplies. I'll bring whatever you need from town." He watched her work, expression thoughtful. "Preston's wife is hosting a dinner next week for her birthday. She specifically asked if you'd attend." Willow's hands stilled. Despite her gradual integration into Nevada City society, she still found large gatherings challenging. A dinner party, small gathering, family and close friends. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "She values your friendship, Willow. And I'd be proud to escort you." The sincerity in his voice helped ease her apprehension. Over the past months, she discovered that while her scars still drew occasional notice, most people in their community had accepted them as simply part of who she was, largely, she suspected, because Samuel treated them as unremarkable. "Very well," she agreed. "Though I have nothing suitable to wear for such an occasion." Samuel's smile was warm with approval and something deeper that made her heart flutter. "You could wear a flour sack and outshine every woman present." She laughed, tossing his mended shirt at him. "Flattery will get you nowhere, Samuel Wyatt." "On the contrary," he replied, catching both the shirt and her hand to pull her down onto his lap. "I think it's getting me exactly where I want to be." Their kiss was playful at first, then shifted into something more heated as his arms encircled her waist, and her hands found their way into his hair. These moments of physical closeness had become increasingly frequent, though Samuel always maintained the respectful boundaries of courtship. His restraint both frustrated and reassured her, evidence of his genuine intentions beyond physical attraction. "I should go," he murmured against her neck, though his arms remained firmly around her, "before I forget myself entirely." Willow reluctantly slipped from his embrace, straightening her skirts with hands that weren't quite steady. The power of their mutual attraction sometimes frightened her, not because she doubted Samuel's feelings, but because she feared the intensity of her own. At the door, he kissed her once more, briefly but thoroughly. "I'll bring fabric from town tomorrow. Margaret's offered to help with a dress for the dinner." After he left, Willow stood by the window watching his retreating figure, marveling at how completely her life had transformed in the span of a few months. From isolated existence to being courted by a man who looked at her scars and saw only strength, it seemed almost too fortunate to trust. Yet trust she did, with a heart gradually relearning how to hope. The Preston dinner party proved less intimidating than Willow had anticipated. In a new dress of deep green wool that Margaret had helped fashion, she found herself welcomed warmly by the dozen guests gathered in the ranch house's comfortable parlor. "You've worked miracles with Samuel," Margaret confided as they arranged dessert plates in the kitchen. "Haven't seen him this happy in all the years he's worked for Edgar." Willow felt a blush warm her cheeks. "He's done far more for me than I for him." Margaret's knowing smile suggested she understood more than Willow had said. "Love isn't about keeping score, dear. It's about finding the person who makes you more completely yourself." Love. The word hung in the air between them, unaddressed but increasingly undeniable. Willow hadn't allowed herself to name the feelings growing within her, fearful of presumption or disappointment. But watching Samuel across the dinner table, catching his frequent glances and private smiles, she could no longer deny the truth. She loved him, his steady strength, his unwavering acceptance, his ability to see beyond her scars to the woman beneath. The realization both terrified and exhilarated her. As February's harsh grip slowly yielded to early signs of spring, their courtship deepened. Samuel began speaking of the future casually at first, then with increasing certainty. Comments about expanding her garden, suggestions for improvements to the cottage, questions about her preferences for furniture and household arrangements. One crisp March morning, he arrived earlier than usual, leading not his familiar gelding but a wagon. "I have something to show you," he announced, helping her up onto the seat. "If you can spare the day." Curious, Willow wrapped her shawl tighter against the lingering winter chill. "Where are we going?" "Not far." His smile held secrets. "Trust me." They traveled north past the Preston ranch, then turned onto a less traveled road that wound up toward the foothills. After an hour's journey, Samuel guided the wagon onto a barely visible track that ended in a small, sheltered valley. Willow gasped at the vista before them. A clear stream wound through meadowland ringed by protective hills. Stands of pine provided windbreaks, and the southern exposure promised abundant sunshine. In the center of the valley stood the partially constructed frame of a house larger than her cottage, with a wide porch facing the mountains. "Samuel, what is this?" she asked, though part of her already suspected the answer. He helped her down from the wagon, holding her hand as they walked toward the structure. "Preston granted me a parcel as part of my ownership stake. I've been building since January whenever weather permitted." The foundation was solid stone. The framing showed at least 4 rooms with spaces for generous windows. Near the house site, a barn had already been completed, and a corral stood ready for livestock. "It's beautiful land," she said softly, taking in the peaceful valley. "Good soil for gardening," Samuel noted, watching her carefully. "Room for a larger orchard than your current one. The stream never runs dry, even in August." She turned to face him, suddenly understanding the purpose of this journey. "Samuel." He took both her hands in his expression more serious than she'd ever seen it. "I wanted you to see it before I asked, to know I've been planning, preparing." He drew a deep breath. "I love you, Willow, have almost since I first met you. I want to build a life with you here if you like this place, or anywhere else you choose." Tears blurred her vision as emotion overwhelmed her. This man had systematically dismantled every defense she'd constructed, had seen her scars and found beauty where others saw only ruin. "I love you too," she whispered, the words finally spoken aloud after months of growing certainty. Samuel's face transformed with joy. He dropped to one knee, still holding her hands. "Willow Dawson, will you marry me? Build this home with me, share your life with mine." For a moment, doubt flickered the memory of another proposal, another man who'd promised forever and then recoiled from the reality of her scars. But Samuel had never seen her unmarked face. He'd known only the woman she was now, had traced those scars with gentle fingers and called her perfect. "Yes," she answered, voice stronger than she expected. "Yes, Samuel, I will marry you." He rose and gathered her into an embrace that lifted her feet from the ground, his laughter echoing across their valley. When he set her down, his kiss held all the promises of their future, tender yet passionate, familiar yet still thrilling. "When?" he asked against her lips. "How soon can you make me the happiest man in Montana territory? How soon can you finish our house?" she countered, laughing. "With proper motivation, 3 weeks." His hand spanned her waist possessively. "I'll hire help from town. 3 weeks seems reasonable." The thought of becoming his wife, of sharing their lives completely, filled her with an anticipation that outweighed any lingering fears. They spent the afternoon walking the boundaries of their land, Samuel pointing out features and possibilities where the garden would flourish, which hillside would provide the best grazing, how the stream could be partially diverted for irrigation. With each step, Willow's vision of her future expanded. No longer the solitary woman in a small cottage, hiding from the world's judgment, but a partner in building something meaningful, a home, a family, a life defined by love rather than loss. As April sunshine warmed the Montana landscape, Samuel made good on his promise. The house rapidly took shape with the help of men from the Broken Arrow and craftsmen from Nevada City. Word of their engagement spread through the community, bringing a steady stream of well-wishers and practical gifts for their new home. Willow divided her time between preparing for the move and helping Margaret Preston plan a simple wedding ceremony to be held at the ranch. She found herself embraced by the community she'd once avoided, invited to quilting circles, consulted on gardening matters, included in the everyday fabric of Nevada City society. "You've bloomed here," Margaret observed as they sorted through linens for Willow's trousseau. "Like one of your own garden plants finally in the right soil," Willow smiled, recognizing the truth in the comparison. "I came here to hide away, to disappear. Instead, I found a place to belong." "Samuel deserves some credit for that," Margaret noted with a knowing smile. "More than some," Willow agreed. "He saw me when I was doing everything possible not to be seen." The wedding day dawned clear and mild, with the mountains standing crisp against a perfect blue sky. In Margaret's bedroom, Willow stood before the mirror in her wedding dress, cream-colored silk, with delicate embroidery along the bodice and sleeves. Her hair was arranged to frame her face rather than hide it, a deliberate choice that symbolized how far she'd come from the woman who'd arrived in Nevada City less than a year ago. "You look beautiful," Margaret declared. adjusting the small wreath of early spring flowers crowning Willow's head. Absolutely radiant, Willow studied her reflection, the scarred and unmarred sides of her face equally visible, no longer a source of shame but simply part of her story. "I feel beautiful," she admitted, "for the first time since the fire." The ceremony took place on the Prestons' veranda, decorated with evergreen boughs and ribbons. Nearly everyone from Nevada City and the surrounding ranches attended, filling the yard with a festive gathering that would have terrified Willow months earlier, but now felt like a proper celebration of the community that had become her own. Samuel waited for her beside the local preacher, his expression transforming as she appeared on Edgar Preston's arm. The love and admiration in his eyes banished any lingering insecurities. This man saw her fully, completely, and found her perfect. Their vows were simple and heartfelt, exchanged with steady voices despite the emotion evident in both their faces. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Samuel cupped her face between his hands deliberately, tenderly including her scarred cheek, and kissed her with a reverence that brought tears to more eyes than just Willow's. The celebration continued through the afternoon and into evening, with music and dancing, abundant food, and the good-natured teasing that accompanied frontier weddings. As twilight approached, Samuel found Willow where she stood chatting with Clara Jenkins. "Time to show my wife her new home, I think," he murmured close to her ear. The possessive pride in the word wife sent a pleasant shiver through Willow. They made their farewells amid cheers and well wishes, then departed in the wagon Samuel had decorated with ribbons and flowers for the occasion. As they approached their valley in the gathering dusk, Willow gasped at the sight of their home. Lanterns had been hung along the porch and in nearby trees, creating a warm welcome that glowed against the darkening landscape. "Who did this?" she asked, delighted by the surprise. "Preston's men, earlier today." Samuel drew the wagon to a halt, "Wanted everything to be perfect for your arrival." Before she could respond, he leaped down and came around to her side. Instead of helping her descend, he simply lifted her into his arms. "Samuel," she laughed, arms circling his neck, "I'm perfectly capable of walking." "Tradition," he insisted, carrying her toward the house. "A man should carry his bride across the threshold of their home." Their home. The words filled her with wonder and gratitude. From the ashes of her former life, this unexpected joy had emerged: a husband who loved her completely, a community that accepted her, a future bright with promise. Samuel paused at the doorway, holding her gaze with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Welcome home, Mrs. Wyatt." "I love you," she whispered, touching his face with tender fingers. His smile held all the promises of their future together. "And I love you scars, strength, and all the beauty that makes you perfectly, wonderfully you." As he carried her across the threshold into their new life, Willow finally understood the truth Samuel had recognized from the beginning. Her scars weren't flaws to be hidden or endured, but marks of courage that had led her across a continent to find healing, purpose, and a love that saw beyond surface appearances to the heart beneath. In the years that followed, the Wyatt homestead flourished into one of the most prosperous in the region. Willow's gardens and orchards became legendary throughout the territory, providing not just for their family, but producing preserves and remedies sought after as far away as Helena and beyond. Samuel expanded their holdings, raising quality horses alongside their cattle operation, his reputation for fair dealing and excellent stock bringing buyers from across the West. Their first child, a son they named James after Willow's father, arrived a year after their wedding, followed by twin daughters, Emily and Rose, 2 years later. As their family grew, so did their home, with rooms added to accommodate children, visiting friends, and the frequent gatherings that made the Wyatt Ranch a center of community life. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Samuel presented Willow with a silver-framed mirror for their bedroom, an extravagant gift he'd commissioned from a craftsman in Helena. As she admired the workmanship, he came to stand behind her, meeting her eyes in the reflection. "Do you remember the first time I touched your scars?" he asked, his fingers gently tracing the familiar ridges on her cheek. "How could I forget?" she replied, leaning back against his chest. "No one had touched them with kindness before you. I told you then that you were perfect." He pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "5 years later, I'm even more certain of it." Willow turned in his arms, her heart full beyond measure. Who would have thought that fire could lead to such happiness? That the worst moment of my life would eventually guide me to the best? Outside their window, their children's laughter rang across the valley as they played in the late afternoon sunshine. Inside, the home they'd built together wrapped them in the warmth of shared memories and continued promises. "I would find you again in 1,000 lifetimes," Samuel murmured against her lips, "scarred or unmarked across any distance." "Fortunately," Willow replied, drawing him closer, "we have this lifetime right here, already perfect in all the ways that matter." And as Samuel's lips found hers in a kiss that still held all the wonder of their first, Willow silently blessed the journey that had brought her to Nevada City, to this man who had taught her that true beauty is recognized not through flawless appearances, but through the courage to love and be loved completely, scars and all.